Has anybody here ever gotten invested in a TV show? Yeah, you've got invested. I mean, really invested. You know, it's one of these shows you've watched every episode. You've learned all the characters. You sat through the slow episodes because you know it was going to build to something. And you endured weird subplot in episode 6, and then because surely that weird episode is going to make a difference someplace else and later, and you stayed loyal. And the season finale comes, right? The season finale comes, and nothing gets resolved. It ends in that season finale with the cliffhanger. And the big question is still out there hanging. The villain is still out there. The couple hasn't figured it out yet. You know what I'm talking about, right? The mystery is still a mystery. And then this summer, you know, they stop and for the production for season 2, and you find out midsummer they're cancel the show. How many of you, that makes you really mad when that happens? Oh, yeah, we raise our hands for that one. That's it. Yeah. No season 2, no explanation, no closure, no satisfying ending, just pain. And it's like, and you're sitting there like, excuse me, I've put in hours of my life, and I've stayed with you through that confusing flashback episode that made no sense. I endured bad acting from all those side characters, and you end it there. You know what I'm talking about, right? Well, guess what? That's Jonah chapter 4. That's where we are in Jonah chapter 4, in case if you've read it. Jonah 4 is like a series finale that ends with no resolution at all. Jonah chapter 4 just stops. No update on Jonah, no wrap-up scene, no redemption monologue, no narrator saying, and Jonah finally understood the mercy of God. There was none of that. Nothing. It just ends, and it ends with a question. And if you don't like endings without closure, well, Jonah 4 is going to frustrate you. But I believe that is why it matters. Because the story ends without resolving Jonah, because the real question is not what happened to Jonah. The real question is, what is God trying to show Jonah? And in turn, what is God trying to show us? That's where we are, because Jonah 4 is really a chapter about perspective. Perspective. Jonah sees one thing and God sees something bigger. Jonah is locked into his hurt and his anger and his comfort and his point of view. And Jonah chapter 4, God gives him what we're going to call today some perspective therapy. And that's where we are. God is providing some perspective therapy. And let's be honest, sometimes we need some perspective therapy. Because, you know, when you're angry, when you're offended or emotional or you're frustrated and your feelings are loud, you start to lose perspective. And you can lose it fast. And when you lose perspective, you can start making very small things big. And very big things, you can make them small. And that's exactly what Jonah does. So let's walk through it. If you'll turn in your Bibles, Jonah chapter 4. If you have the U version of the Bible app, you can go to the menu button and find events. And under events is an outline of today's message along with the scripture from Jonah 4. But let's walk through it. We got to remember where we've been. There's only 3 or 4 chapters. Chapter 1, Jonah runs from God, right? Chapter 2, Jonah prays from inside a fish, a big fish. And chapter 3, Jonah finally obeys God, goes to Nineveh and preaches, and the city repents. This evil, wicked city turns back toward God. And you would think chapter 4 would begin with some type of celebration. Woo! I mean, you would think that Jonah would be high-fiving angels here. I mean, think about it. You would think he'd be shouting, look what God's done. I would think he would be the happiest preacher alive. Because let's be honest, if a whole city, like if all of our community here repented after one sermon, most pastors, they wouldn't shut up about it. They'd write a book, we'd start a podcast and launch a conference, we'd sell sermon series, the 5 leadership lessons from the revival in Nineveh, and we would be unbearable. But Jonah, he's not celebrating. Jonah is furious. So let's take a look. Jonah chapter 4, verse 1, this is what it says. But to Jonah this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. Not mildly irritated, not slightly bothered, not, I just need to take a minute. Angry. He was angry. And this chapter is about what happens when we lose perspective. And the first thing that I think that the lesson we can learn in this is this. When we lose perspective, you can resent what God is doing. And Jonah is angry because God showed mercy. Let that sink in for just a moment. The city repented. Violence, these violent people, it all stopped. People turned from evil, and God relented from his judgment to them. And Jonah's upset. He's not upset that evil won. He is upset that mercy won. Look at verse 2. Verse 2 says, he prayed to the Lord. Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to foretell by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now that sounds like a great God to me. This is wild. Isn't this bizarre? It really is bizarre to me. Jonah basically says, God, this is exactly why I ran. I knew you would do what you do. I knew you'd be gracious. I knew you'd be compassionate and you'd forgive people that I didn't want forgiven. And Jonah's upset over the very thing that makes God God. And that's what happens when we lose your perspective. It gets distorted, our mind does. And you can start resenting God for once what you praise God for. Jonah liked grace. I mean, he liked grace when he was in the fish, right? He liked mercy when he needed saving. He liked second chances when his life was on the line. And before we judge Jonah too quickly, because that would be very easy to do, I think we need some honesty here. We love mercy. We sing about it. We are grateful for it. But we love mercy as long as it lands where we think it should land. We love grace for ourselves, but we may struggle with grace for others in our lives. We say, Lord, forgive me. I'm human. But for them, Lord, deal with them deeply and thoroughly and preferably by Tuesday. This is what distorted perspective does. It shrinks your heart and it enlarges your grievances. It's like looking through binoculars backwards. Have you ever looked through binoculars the other way? It's everything that's important looks very small, and the wrong things suddenly feel huge. This is Jonah. The whole city is turning to God. And it should have been huge. Instead, Jonah makes it feel really small. His anger, his discomfort, and his preferences, those become huge. And this is what happens when emotions hijack perspective. Which leads us to another truth here. And that is this. You can do the will of God and still need some perspective therapy. Because Jonah obeyed, right? He obeyed eventually, reluctantly, probably with crossed arms in his soul, but he obeyed. He did what God told him to do. He went to Nineveh. He preached the message. He did what God told him to do, but his heart never caught up with his obedience. And that means it's possible to do the right thing and still see things the wrong way. You can obey externally while being a mess internally. You know, you can still go and sit in church and be bitter. You can serve and still be selfish. You can forgive with your mouth, but not with your heart. You can read the Bible and still resist what God is trying to do in you. And so Jonah is doing the will of God without sharing the heart of God. That's what's happening here. And that's where perspective therapy becomes necessary. Because God is not after your behavior. He's after your heart. And he is not trying to change Jonah's direction. He's trying to change Jonah's perspective. And honestly, that is still how God works with us. He'll let us walk through situations that expose how small our perspectives have become. Not to shame us, but to change us. That's his goal with us. And Jonah is not just irritated. Jonah goes on here and he starts to spiral. You thought it was bad, now it's getting worse. Look at verse 3. Now, Lord, take my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. Now that escalated quickly, right? I mean, the whole city repents and turns and they're saved. And Jonah says, yeah, I'd rather die. That's not a very healthy emotional range here. I mean, this is interesting. And before we laugh too hard, let's admit it, we may not say it quite that dramatically, but we can all have some dramatic moments, right? Don't look at your person beside you. Don't look at a minor inconvenience hits, and suddenly we act like civilization is collapsing around us. The Wi-Fi buffers, and we're entering the valley of the shadow of death. It's like, I have work to do. You go through the drive-thru and they say, can you please pull forward? You're like, now I have a persecution complex. We can get all worked up very fast about little things, small things. And that's what Jonah has done. And so God gives some perspective therapy here through just a question. It's really ironic. It's just a question. Look at verse 4. But the Lord replied, is it right for you to be angry? Such a gracious response, isn't it? I mean, God, he doesn't thunder down from heaven. He doesn't say, Jonah, I'm just done with you. This is it. He asks a simple question. Is it right for you to be angry? And God is trying to help Jonah to step back and to look again. Get some perspective. That's what perspective therapy does. It slows you down long enough so that you can really see what's going on, because our emotions can jump in very fast. Because in the moment, your emotions always make their case. They usually make it pretty powerful when we have emotions. You're angry because you're angry and you're like, I'm justified in this. Or you're hurt, you say, because I'm right. You're frustrated. Your frustration says, this is unbearable. And sometimes God lovingly says, take a breath, look again. Is that really true? Is that really as big as you think it is? And so God's question is not meant to shame Jonah. It's meant to reveal Jonah. And sometimes the most gracious thing God does is to ask a question that we've been avoiding. Why are you so upset? Why did that hit so hard? Why are you still carrying this so long? what's underneath that reaction? Not every emotion is sinful. Don't get me wrong. Not every emotion is sinful, but every emotion does say something. It reveals something. Often anger can point to pride, and fear can point to control issues, and bitterness may point unhealed wounds that we have. Jealousy may point to insecurity. Despair may point to misplaced hope. And so God's question to Jonah is not just for Jonah. God's question is for us too. Is it right for you to be angry? Is it right for you to keep replaying that over and over? Is it right for you to let the offense shape your whole spirit? A lot of us treat feelings like they're the final authority. I feel it, therefore it must be true. And that is not true. Feelings are real, but they're not always right. Can I say that again? Feelings are real, but they're not always right. It's kind of like a smoke alarm. A smoke alarm in your house, sometimes the alert you because there's a fire, right? A real fire. Yeah, that's why we have the smoke alarm. But sometimes it's like a dinner bell. Dinner's ready. So my wife's not here, so I can say that. Oh, I'm in trouble. Either way, you do not just panic. You stop and ask, what is actually happening here? And that's what God is doing with Jonah. But Jonah does not answer well. He doesn't at all. He walks away. He just walks away. And that leads to another truth. Bad perspective is going to isolate you. It could isolate you. Look at verse 5. Jonah had gone out and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter. He sat in its shade and waited to see what would happen to the city. He leaves the city. He sits down east of it and he makes a shelter and he just waits for what happens. Jonah is isolating here. And that's what happens when your perspective gets poisoned by bitterness and self-pity. When you have anger built up, it pulls away. Because your perspective is wrong, it withdraws and it builds a little shelter and it sits in it and it pouts. And Jonah would rather sit outside the city angry than stay in the city and be grateful. And he would rather pout in private than rejoice in public. And so he's putting distance between himself and what God is doing. And that's what happens when emotions set your perspective. You move away from joy. You move away from people. You move away from gratitude. And you move away from the heart of God. And then you sit there and you convince yourself that you're the reasonable one. And Jonah's perspective is so distorted that he can sit right next to a revival and still be miserable. And that can happen to us too. You can be right next to God's goodness and still miss it because the perspective is off. So now God does something fascinating. And this is another strange part of this story. Instead of just telling Jonah the lesson, he shows him a lesson. Look at verse 6. Verse 6. Then the Lord God provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head and ease his discomfort. And look at this. Jonah was very happy about the plant. Oh, man. This is the first time in the whole chapter that Jonah's happy, right? Not over revival, not over repentance or mercy or changed lives, over a plant. A plant. A little extra shade, and suddenly Jonah's thrilled. That tells you how distorted his perspective has become. He's more emotionally moved by personal comfort than spiritual awakening. And again, Again, before we get too hard on Jonah, how often maybe do we do some of the same things? I've seen it. I've seen it in church. I took a group, on a youth group when I was a youth minister one time. We used the church van, and we went to an event, and we were there for the week, and 3 of the kids got baptized while we were at this event, and it was just such a revival and stuff. And we got in the van, we drove all the way back to this church, and on Sunday, I was walking in, and I'd reported that we had these baptisms and these decisions, and things were so great. And I was walking on cloud nine, walking in, and one of the elders, where the van stays at his house, come up to me and said, "Hey, next time you're on a trip, do not let the kids eat in the van. It stinks." I was like, okay. Someone sitting right next to revival, but worried about something else. We can sit mostly unmoved by eternal things and get incredibly stirred up by temporary things. We can be more upset about the ruined afternoon than a ruined life. More bothered by inconvenience than lost souls. More passionate about our comfort than about compassion. And so Jonah is very happy about the plant because it helps him. All right, let's look at 7 and 8, verse 7 and 8. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm. I told you it gets bizarre. Which chewed the plant so that it withered. And when the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head, and he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, "It would be better for me to die than to live." Wah. Do you notice a repeated phrase? God provided, God provided, God provided. God provided the fish, right? God provided a plant. He provided a worm. He provided a wind. God's in control here. And sometimes God will use discomfort and comfort to correct our perspective. He will give us shade, and then he'll remove the shade. Not because he's cruel, but because he is teaching, he is transforming, and he is moving. And sometimes the plant has to wither so we can see how much of our joy was tied to something way too small. And we're not a part of the bigger plan. And sometimes God lets a worm come because our perspective has gotten attached to the comfort instead of anchored in him. Some of us are doing fine spiritually as long as the plant is still there. As long as life is manageable and as long as people cooperate and as long as our plans stay on schedule, what I'm talking about, as long as the budget works. And when the plant withers, when the shade goes away and the hot wind blows, and suddenly all kinds of things come out of us. Why? Because discomfort reveals perspective. And if losing the plant makes you lose all perspective, then maybe your peace was resting on the plant more than it was resting on God. And now God explains this lesson. Here we go. I like this. Because God cared, Jonah cared more about the plant than people here. And here comes the lesson. Verse 9 through 11. But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" "It is," he said. "And I'm so angry, I wish I were dead." Oh my gosh, this guy. Verse 10. But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it. You didn't make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I have not been concerned about the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot even tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" I don't know what's up with the animal thing. I haven't figured that out. But that's the ending. That's it. No second season. That's it. No wrap up, no clean bow, no update on Jonah's response. Just this question. And that's what is God saying? Jonah, look at your perspective. It's all wrong. You are grieving over a plant, and it's a plant that you didn't even create. A plant that you did not sustain, and a plant that benefited from briefly. And you care more about that plant than you do about the people that are made in my image. That is the heart of this chapter. Jonah is emotional over a plant, but unmoved over people. Broken over lost shade, but not over lost souls. Concerned about his comfort, but not God's compassion. And that's what bad perspective will do. It makes little things look ultimate, and ultimate things look little. And if we're honest, we can do the same things. We get deeply stirred over stuff that don't matter in a week, while barely being moved by the things that will matter for eternity. And we can get all worked up over our schedules and our opinions and our preferences and our discomfort and lose sight of the people around us. And that is why we need some perspective therapy. And that's Jonah chapter 4. So what do you do when you need some perspective therapy? Well, you let God slow you down. You let him ask maybe some deeper questions. You let him expose where your perspective has gotten small. You let him show you where you've made too much out of the plant and too little out of people. And maybe that's where some of us are today. Maybe our perspective has gotten tight and narrow and inward. Maybe you've been more focused on the discomfort than God's purposes. More focused on frustration than on God's mercy. More focused on the little patch of shade than the people around you. And maybe like Jonah, you've been sitting east of the city, just out there whining. When your perspective gets distorted, God lovingly works to help you see what really matters. So, I invite you today to just look again. Look at God again. Look at people again. Look at your situation again. Look what really matters again. Because sometimes what we need most is not immediate relief. Sometimes what we need most is some perspective. And the good news is this, that God is patient enough to give it. Check this out. Whatever you make the biggest thing in your life, it's going to shape your heart. So let's make sure it's what matters to God. I just wanted to kind of wrap up this series, and because I've really enjoyed Jonah. I hope you have too, and I've enjoyed going through it. I can't remember preaching through it. I've gone back and looked for notes, and I'm not sure if I have or not. I've read Jonah many times, and I've watched cartoons about it, but. But going through it, it's really interesting, and it's and a lot of lessons to learn. So I just want to highlight that here as we close this series. I want to bring us back to this simple truth. And Alan, if you could put that up there and just leave it up there until I pray. Jonah isn't just about a reluctant prophet. It's about a relentless God who pursues us, transforms our perspective, and calls us on mission to share his heart for people. And that's really what we've been seeing every week in this series. We saw God who pursued Jonah when he ran, and we saw God who heard Jonah when he cried out in the fish. We saw God who gave Jonah another chance when he failed. And today we did see God who didn't give up on Jonah, even when Jonah's heart was off. And that's who our God is. He's relentless, not in anger, but in grace, not in judgment, but in mercy. And not in a pushy way, but pursuing us again and again and again. And so it's a question that we need to ask today. Where is God pursuing you right now? Maybe for some of you, God is pursuing you. He's been pursuing you to come back to Him. Come back. You've drifted. You've been doing your own thing, you know. It's so easy to do. But like Jonah, God hasn't stopped calling your name. And today could be that moment to turn back, because the same God who met Jonah in the storm, the same God who met him in the fish and in his anger, is the same God who is meeting you right here, right now. So maybe if you've been drifting, it's time to return. For others, God is not just pursuing you, but He's trying to transform your perspective. And maybe your heart has gotten a little tight, and maybe you've been focused more on your plant, you know, the comfort and your frustrations and your situation. Maybe you've been carrying anger and bitterness. Maybe you're carrying disappointment. And today God is gently just asking you, is it right for you to be angry? Not to shame you. His goal is to free us. It's to free us, to help us to see again, to help us care about what He cares about, to move us from a heart, from inward to a heart that's outward. And then maybe there's a third category. Some of you God is calling you beyond yourself, not just to receive His grace, but to reflect His heart. Because Jonah struggled with this. He wanted God's mercy for himself, but maybe not for others. And if we're honest, we can do some of the same things, but Jesus didn't just come so that we could receive grace. He came also of the grace we received, that we share it. There are people in your life right now, there are family members or friends or neighbors or coworkers, and they matter to God too. And part of God's call in your life is to care about them like He does. And so I think we need to take a moment. We need to take a moment and ask ourselves, where's God pursuing me? Where is He trying to change my perspective? And where is He calling me to reflect His heart? And wherever that is, don't resist. Don't resist. Don't push it away. Don't run like Jonah. Just respond. Respond. Because the God of Jonah is still at work today. He's still pursuing, still transforming, still calling. And the best thing that we can do is just say yes. That was the book of Jonah. This morning, if maybe you've come and the Lord's laying something on your heart, maybe you have a prayer request, maybe it's for somebody else, maybe it's for you. Maybe it's one of the things we've talked about today that you're dealing with, and you just need some prayer. We have some people from our prayer ministry that will be right up front here after we sing our closing song, and if they'd be glad to meet with you and to pray with you if you have that need today. And so we encourage you to do that. If you come prepared to give, there's some boxes in the back you can put it in, and there's also a QR code if you would like to give online. It's on there. You can scan that and give online if you would like. So I'm glad you were here. I hope you enjoyed this series as much as I did. And I'm glad we have a God that pursues us.